Welcome back. This has been such an amazing day. Oh my goodness, the feedback I've been hearing has just been amazing. People have found their identity. People have told me that the wind is back in their sails. They've been telling me that they feel seen and validated and heard. And wow, nothing could make me happier. I am here with people that I love and cherish and respect and value. This has been an amazing day. Quick announcements: silence your phones, notice your exits. If you need to smoke or vape, please go to the far reaches of the property. If you need to evacuate, please go to the parking lot, to the covered area, and don't leave until first responders tell you it's okay to leave. I think that's it for announcements. No, I don't know what's out that door. Teresa's going to find out what's out because it has an exit sign. It's probably the outside. Don't lock yourself out. I know. So this is what neurodivergent people do. There's a door. We don't know what's beyond it. Oh, tricky. There is an exit out. There is an exit out there too. Okay, but yeah, don't scare us on the stage. Not okay. May we have Mary Doherty and Andrew Eddy and Sonia Durek on the screen, please. Unmute and make your cameras happen. There's Andrew. And there's Mary and Sonia. Oh, how happy I am. So what you're seeing on your screen is Mary Doherty, Autistic Doctors International, and she is awake very late at night, and I love you so much for doing that. And then Andrew Eddy and Sonia Durek are joining us from Australia, and so they're up very early in the morning. I love you both so much for doing that. And to my right, I have Teresa Thomas and then Ron Crawford. I am going to let them say their own things, but I'm going to kick us off a little bit with, many of us have been here all day. We've been listening to each other talk. We've been listening to others talk. We've been sharing our stories and hearing the stories of others. And I think we're adding to our already deep and profound knowledge that this community needs to be understood correctly, needs to be included with equity, and needs to have a voice in every part of life. One of the things that I think Mary will share, Autistic Doctors International, in addition to supporting actually autistic doctors, yay for out at work, for those who are, and yay for those who are part of the organization, whether they're out at work or not. They also do research, and they include the community in their research. Because up until organizations like Autistic Doctors International, for you on the screen, if I'm pointing that way, it's because that's where I see you. You exist in the ceiling. We're in a church, and I point to the skies, right? So that's why I keep doing that. I keep gesturing to the people up there. And my autistic brain almost broke out into song because there is a musical with a song up there. Sorry. So Mary, I hope you'll share with us some of the research that you all do. Andrew is in the tech world and is doing amazing things for the neurodivergent community. Sonia, if you were here earlier, you saw her and her folks and their little documentary about the sensory positive spaces at work. Ron does wonderful leadership coaching. for the DEI space, and my sweet friend Teresa, who introduced me to half of the people that you got to meet. Teresa is with MITRE, and you can correct my retelling your story if I don't do it right, but in brief, Teresa went to fellow higher up management and said, you know, there's this whole amazing community out there of neurodivergent people that should be working for us. We should go find them. And then when we get here, we should do it right. And they're like, yeah, we should do that. So we've got several different perspectives joining us tonight, including my own little lived experience perspective. And part of what we're going to be talking about is, what are we doing? What do we hope it will accomplish? And what would we like others to join us in? Okay. So it seems to have been working well that we start with the people out in the digital universe. So Mary, would you like to kick us off and tell us about you and your organization?
Sure, thank you. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here. Yeah, so I founded Autistic Doctors International back in 2019, and we have about 600 about 600 doctors who identify as autistic. We also have a linked group for autistic medical students. And that's going around the same length of time, maybe slightly less. And our main areas are peer support for our members, advocacy, research, education, and training. Myself, I'm an autistic woman. I'm an anaesthetist. I'm parent of 2 neurodivergent kids, and my goal is to improve healthcare for the whole autistic community and just make things easier for the next generation of healthcare staff coming behind us. Make it easy to be autistic in healthcare, because there's loads of us.
So Mary's one of those people that I just want to like sit at her feet and listen to all day, because I'm just so enamored and in love and respectful of all that Mary and her group are accomplishing. I think you will probably fall in love too with all of these incredible people. But if you want to hear more from Mary and Sonia, they are part of the digital program, so make sure that you are signed up for that. Mary is joined by Sebastian Shaw, one of the lead researchers in the organization, and they share really, really well about the work that they're doing. Sonia, how about we go to you?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm a designer and have been designing for over 25 years. What has inspired me to undertake further research in the design communities is my oldest daughter. And so we're researching the impact of the built environment on sensory comfort, and we discovered that 20% of our community in Australia is neurodiverse, possibly more. There are different statistics out there. 20% are neurodiverse, and this is diagnosed. So we thought 1 in 5 of us, wow, that's a substantial proportion of the population. And common to being neurodiverse is heightened sensory response. So then we made the assumption, therefore it's likely that at least 20% of us have a heightened sensory response to our surroundings. And so how senses are engaged is a large reason for why and how we design. But so we thought we would undertake a research project in better understanding what the makeup of our population actually is. So we set out to undertake 1,000 sensory profiles across the many organisations we work work with, and those the sensory profile assessment was authored by Winnie Dunn, a distinguished professor, Winnie Dunn, at the University of Missouri. And with her permission, we adapted the survey and undertook this study, and she has been our guide throughout. So at the time that video was done, that you saw earlier on, we were at, I think, 932 or thereabouts sensory profiles. In the last week, we've just exceeded that amount, and we're over 1,000. So we've reached our goal, and we're going to keep on going. Now we're at 8 different organisations and over 1,000 sensory profiles. And what we've discovered is actually really mind-blowing, in that we thought that 20% of our population is likely to have a heightened sensory response to their surroundings. But we actually found, out of the so far, I'll talk about the 6 organisations that we know in detail about. Out of the 6 organisations, the lowest average for one of the organisations was actually 50%. And the highest average for another one of the organisations was 89%. So we realised that sensory design and sensory comfort in the built environment is more important than ever. And Winnie Dunn rightfully said, not only is this important for our neurodiverse community, but she rightfully said, universal design is good for us all. So we're changing the way we design to ensure that we are designing more inclusively and for improved sensory comfort, hoping that we will bring more people to work. That's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Sonia. So when I started talking to Sonia, I get very excited. I get those who know me, I get very excited.
Mhm.
And I started realizing that between Andrew, Mary, and Sonia, when I was doing the recordings for this event with all of the speakers around the world, I kept mentioning all 3 of them, kind of like an Uber fan. Like, you have to hear these people. And I was so excited when Sonia said that she and her group would put together their little documentary thing, because, you know, you can hear about it, but until you see it, once you start to understand that there could actually be, I don't know, I would think of it as like joyous comfort at work. Like, wow, I don't have to be spectacularly uncomfortable while I do my job. The world looks like a very different place. And the fact that you're getting these statistics, that the workplace is filled with significantly more sensory need than we ever imagined, it really does lend to that idea that universal design. We were talking about it just briefly in the education panel earlier today. Universal design, where, you know, we can truly bring an equitable experience to all, is really what's going to help all of us the most. Andrew, I can't wait for people to hear what you do.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's a beautiful Sunday morning here in Melbourne, and the sun is shining through the window, so getting some good rays. Yes, so Andrew Eddy, founder of Untapped. We've been going a number of years. We do a whole range of things, but what we're trying to do is create a neurodiverse employment ecosystem that is sustainable and scalable. And we work with companies. We decided to start at that end of it. So rather than try and have more people come through school, university, we thought, well, let's start with creating more jobs. So let's work with organizations to try and help them create the environment where things could work, people could thrive. So we're working with a number of companies to create that environment, to create that ecosystem. We have an approach where we can implement teams of people in a short space of time, and then work with the company to build that into business as usual and how they do things. So we have over 70% of our employees are neurodivergent, either being trainees that work in our clients or members of our team who work with them. and that's a great place to be, with working with all these great people in a range of roles, including management roles and training roles and so on. We have a number of elements to our ecosystem. We have a way of screening people, which we don't use interview. We have tools and curriculum that we've put in place to help with their hard skills training, their soft skills, their life skills, their transferable skills. We use things like Optimize in our training with the organization. We use Pymetrics, a set of neuroscience games, to identify as a screening tool to help us identify people who will be successful. We also use Genius Armory as a cybersecurity training tool to identify people who might have an interest in those sorts of jobs. So we work with organizations to implement a comprehensive approach. So having done that, and getting that sort of going, we also do need to have an eye on how do we create a pipeline of talent for that. So hence, 4.5 years ago, started the process of creating this community of practice called the Neurodiversity Hub, which was about working with universities and employers and service providers to define a co-curricular program that would sit alongside university and college courses that would hopefully impact 3 areas where I believe that we needed to improve. One was about the pathways to college and university. Another was to create the scaffolding programs to help students stay at university and get through their course. And the third one was to address something we found was quite pervasive, and that was that whilst those who could get through university were able to do that and do that very well, they may not have had any work experience. So when they came to apply for a job, they just didn't stack up. So when the hiring manager was considering them alongside their peers who might have had a lot of job experiences during their time, they just didn't get the jobs. So it was really about putting in place that co-curricular program. And at the time we were doing that, we were fortunate to be able to be connected to some universities in the US, RIT, and I think Laurie Ackles was on earlier, also Landmark College, and also CUNY in New York. So we had the chance to meet up with them and talk to them about the program we were thinking of, and they gave us some great input, but they also said, well, what are you trying to do? And so we talked to them about what we were doing, and they said, well, can we be part of this? And so we had unintentionally had other organizations or these universities wanting to join. So long story short, we now have 11 universities in Australia that are part of the hub. We have 16 in the US. We have 1 in Dublin, 1 in the UK, and we're talking to universities in Spain, Canada, and New Zealand. So that's all terrific. And they all interact in different ways, depending on who's involved, whether it's students coming into the university, whether it's student success, whether it's employability, whether it's research. So it really does depend. And we've been fortunate to have a number of internships with the Neurodiversity Hub over the years, and created and curated some great resources in the areas of university students and job seekers, for employers, for universities, in the area of mental health, for entrepreneurship, in the built environment, and Sonia's part of that. We've also got a team of neurodivergent writers who have developed some great life skills courses called Be Your Best Academy, and they provide a range of experiences for autistic adults or neurodivergent adults, from what do you do once you've got your diagnosis, to cooking and nutrition, to life organizational skills, to relationships and making friends. I mentioned before about Genius Armory. We've created a free training platform called Genius Armory, which is providing some fundamentals training in cybersecurity as a way of autistic and neurodivergent individuals finding out if cybersecurity might be an area of interest to them. And that's been a real eye-opener. I just heard the other day from one of our collaborators in the US that one of her clients, she pointed them towards Genius Armory, and they said, "Oh no, I couldn't do that." And they actually did try it, and now they're convinced that that is what they want to do for their career. So it's really heartening to hear those sorts of stories, that the difference that can make. So we're now extending that program, and we're creating a shorter high school's version of Genius Armory, 2 to 3 hours, which is pitched at years 7 to 10, and really trying to get into these teenagers at a point where they're trying to make choices about streams that they might go into, and hopefully we can get more teenagers thinking about STEM as a career. As part of that project, we're also extending the existing curriculum for Genius Armory, and we're creating a stream, I guess, if you call it that, a stream for veterans and return to work. So we're trying to broaden the appeal, because we think there's another group of untapped talent out there that could benefit from this. Through the program that we run with some of our collaborators, including DXC Technology and ANZ, which is one of the banks here in Australia, we've undertaken some research with La Trobe University around mental health, and they've created a whole toolkit for mental health training. And so we now can run that within our clients, and we've also created an online version with La Trobe. So it's now available for anyone in the world to undertake. So it's about 10 hours of mental health training, which includes a lot of focus around autism. As part of our ecosystem, we're trying to change the narrative, and a key part of that is conferences. And we've been involved with the Australian Autism Work Summit for the last 4 years, and we did the last one in April last year, which was a 2-day virtual event, and that was a fabulous bringing together of a range of global people and a global audience. So we're now planning the next one, which will be in March next year. We've also done a lot of work with University College Dublin. We helped them put on a conference in December 2020. And we then kicked off a series of monthly neurodiversity masterclasses, which takes one of the speakers from that conference and allows them to have a further discussion once a month. So we've run that right through since then, and they're getting something like 700 registrations a month for that. And earlier this year in May, we worked for quite a while, obviously, but in May we ran another conference called Neurodiversity and the Legal System, and that was really trying to talk about and highlight the intersection between neurodiversity and the criminal justice system, police, prison, parole, probation, judicial process, and policy. And we had speakers from North America, from Ireland, from England, from Europe, from Israel, from Australia, New Zealand, talking about this topic, because it's a global issue. And we're now going to be running monthly. We're going to fold that into the monthly masterclasses, and we're looking at the next conference, which we think will probably be something like neurodiversity and mental health. So that's just some of the, a bit of a snapshot of some of the things we're up to, and I'm going to shut up now. Thank you.
Some of the things we're up to. Well, now you know why I think these people are so brilliant and amazing. Thank you, Andrew. I feel a profound sense of gratitude to each of you, because you have chosen to do work in your respective fields, but so profoundly on behalf of the neurodivergent community. I get emotional over it. I get teary over it, because part of why I wanted to bring these three that are on the screen and folks that are here on the stage together and share them with the community, the audience that I could gather, was because we don't know. We don't know that this stuff is happening. We don't know that there are people out there willing to put their heart and soul into activities like this, into intellectual, technical, medical, physical pursuits. And we need to know. Because part of what we need to get up the next day and take a deep breath and face it is to know that there are people out there working on our behalf, and maybe they don't have all the answers yet, but they're working on it, right? So I want to turn to you, Ron. You're you're sort of unique in this space, and I hope I didn't like put you someplace that's too terribly uncomfortable, because up until a few months ago, neurodivergence wasn't a focus. It's not like it wasn't on your radar, and you can share why it's on your radar. But I think your thinking's evolved maybe a little bit in the last several months. Share what you do. Share your thinking.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm suddenly terribly self-conscious of the fact that I don't have a tremendously attractive accent I can throw at you.
I know, they're so nice to listen to, aren't they?
I know. I could listen to those accents. Thank you very much for that.
I just want to cut in and say that all that stuff Andrew just listed would be intimidating with or without the accent.
Okay.
So don't feel bad.
Yeah. So as Don Marie said, I'm not going to have a list of programs and things, but I do have a little bit of a story of getting involved in this, and you know, it's a little bit of what I shared in an earlier introduction, but basically, I think the motivation to see the impact of this is a realization within my field, which is essentially at this point, the presence or the present focus is on leadership and leadership development, and essentially making leaders better, making the leadership environment better. There was a phrase coined several years ago that when leaders get better, everybody gets better, because you know that's what influences cultures, that's what influences environments. It's how organizations instantiate the way they treat people is through leadership. And so we're really at an interesting cusp, if you will, within industry, within society, where we have massive transformation that's occurring. And I would argue that the reliance and the importance of leadership has probably never been higher than it is now in terms of helping us to move through that. And one of the major trends that we see in this space is the fact that the old management philosophies of how to do business and how to run organizations are really quickly becoming obsolete, because many of those management models were based around the manipulation and utilization of people as assets, as commodities. It didn't rely on the realization of the reality of human nature and humans, and the variety and the diversity of humans. And so much of, especially the American economy, is built around these ideas that people are just disposable. And we've heard so many of these leadership philosophies that talk about, well, yeah, you know, one of the way to motivate people is to basically threaten them. Well, if you don't want to do the job, there's somebody behind you that will do it. And the reality is today is, especially if you look around industry and you look at what's going on, especially in the United States, that's not the way it is. Industries, businesses everywhere can't find people, and when they can find people, they struggle with retaining them. And I think our core philosophy, our core perspective is that the reason you're not keeping people is because you're not loving people. That's what it starts with. You need to love people. And that, especially in an American vernacular, is a pretty foreign concept in some places. And so that's the transformation, because one of the things that happened, I won't go too deep into this, although this is one of my areas of real passion, is prior to COVID, the American workforce was predominantly baby boomer in terms of population. Post-COVID, it's now predominantly millennial and Gen Z. So during that transition, when everything fell apart and everybody was vacant and everything else, the world that we go back to, the offices that we go to, the work environment that we go to is not the same. And it will never go back, because the predominant population in the workforce, that's not what they're going to tolerate. What they expect, and by the way, if there's any baby boomers who are like, oh yeah, this generation, you know, if you don't like this generation that's coming into the workforce now, understand you created them. You instilled the values of them. You instilled the values that we need to appreciate people, that we need to recognize people, that we need to encourage people. And so that's what workplaces need. And so what we need is we need leaders that are empathetic, that are servant oriented. And a huge part of that, and this is really where it comes back around to this conference, neurodiversity is a huge hole in that. We have a lot of focus on diversity and inclusion, especially in the terms of the diversity aspect, but many organizations aren't inclusive. And when we go to the extension of neurodiversity, sometimes hidden, sometimes unseen things that people really don't understand, it's very easy to understand accommodations for somebody in a wheelchair. And I mean, ADA has been around for how long? And it's still not perfect, right? So this is not a simple, easy solution, but from a leadership standpoint, that's where it's got to start. So we need leaders that focus on that and start to establish cultures and philosophical perspectives on people that changes the soundtrack, changes the vernacular in our businesses. And that's why, for me, involvement in this is as much a learning experience. I'm just fascinated, as Don Marie said, the fact that these resources exist and they're out there and that they're things that we can tap into. When she first stepped me into this, for those that weren't here earlier, quickly, I met her at a Binghamton Chamber of Commerce meeting. She said she needed speakers. I like to speak. I'll go anywhere and speak. I said, hey, what do you need me to speak on? She said, well, let me tell you what we do. And after an hour-long Zoom meeting, my brain was fractured. I had a completely different perspective.
I broke him.
She broke me. Now, this is somebody, I grew up with an autistic brother. And I have all the stories of doing that in the process that he went through, and the early innovations of patterning and seeing him mainstreamed, and the fights that I would get on the bus with kids that would pick on him and all of that, right? But it never kind of clicked until that 1 hour Zoom meeting. So, you know, I think that there's a great opportunity. I don't have the infrastructure that's been discussed or the tools. I'm happy they exist, because my main focus is I made a career out of being a connector and connecting people to resources. And actually, a part of my career, I haven't told you this yet, but I was a large part of my career, I was an interpreter. I worked for 33 years at Lockheed Martin, which is an engineering corporation. And I realized for a large part of that, I was interpreting between the business people and the technical people. I would be in meetings and the technical people would rattle on, and the business people would say, I have no idea what that guy just said. And I would interpret it for him. And I was very popular because the business people were all like, this is a guy that knows what they're saying. And excuse the phrase, the geeks were all like, we finally found our voice, and it is Ron.
You were the techie whisperer.
I was the tech whisperer. So I'll wrap up with that. But it is a great honor to be here, especially with these individuals, and I appreciate everybody being here, and I'm just excited about what the future holds.
Thanks, Ron. And you know, it's an hour-long video call because I kind of grilled people. Nobody was getting in front of my audience that I did not approve of. And I needed to make sure that, you know, if this wasn't Ron's original space, what was he going to bring to it? And as I've gotten to know you, Ron, and why I invited you to be part of this panel is because you have the heart. I mean, literally, like tears welling up in my eyes when you're talking about, you know, what we need to do is love people at work. I mean, what would happen to your day if you walked into work, or you walked into school, or you walked into anywhere and you knew they cared? You knew they cared, right? They might not be doing everything right. They might not fully understand you all, but you know they care. it changes everything. It's profound. And it's a voice like that that this conference needed. And so I'm grateful that you've been here because, yeah, there are a lot of us neurodivergents talking about the work that we're doing in this space. We're sort of, you know, steeping in the tea of all of this all the time. But I wanted to be very careful that we weren't getting insular in the way that I was trying to reject with the makeup of this conference. And so, you know, thank you for being here and for being willing to lend your voice and for being a gracious learner. It means a lot. And I've talked to some people out here who have already heard you speak, and it means a lot to them too. So,
Thank you. It's a
yeah.
great privilege to be here.
So Teresa, you're next. And yeah, no kidding. Teresa was this person who answered an email from this crazy lady she didn't know. And she's been riding the train ever since, introducing me to people and keeping me encouraged and cheering me on. And none of this would be happening without you. So thank you for being here. You have really cool stuff to share. So
Do, but mostly I want to fangirl for just a second. Andrew is who I want to be when I grow up. And he has been ever since I met him. And I've told him this before. I got a meeting with you on Wednesday. We're meeting this Wednesday, right? Isn't that our next? Yeah. He's on my advisory board for half the work I do. I have a mantra that I tell myself, one dragon at a time. I can only slay one dragon at a time because I am ADHD and I all the things. He managed to do it all at once, and I have no idea how. But I did want to point out neurodiversityhub.com. Are we .com or .org? We're .com, right?
Sorry, it's .org.
.org.
.org. Someone else has started on neurodiversityhub.com up in Brisbane, but we're the original on neurodiversityhub.org.
.org. For the record, just because I like to say this wherever I go, MITRE was the first .org ever. Just
nice.
Neurodiversityhub.org. Those bajillion things he just listed that sort of after a while you're just like, they're all there, or a link to them. And a lot of it is free. Some of it is pay for, some of the courses and things. I think there's probably a link to Genius Armory there. If you go to look for Genius Armory, it's the British spelling, Armory. But
both spellings work. We got the other domain, so they both went to the same place.
Both Genius Armories.
Yay.
You just pick a dot.
I can't spell either, but I'll find it.
All right. Go to Neurodiversity Hub. You'll find it from there. But amazing, amazing resources, as is Andrew. So, and then I also wanted to circle back on what you were saying about we just need to love and provide that safe space. And if you're thinking to yourself, yeah, the place I work ain't gonna be like that, it can be enough for you to be that, just yourself. And I learned this a couple weeks ago. I was walking our students. I'll tell you in a minute, Bill, about my students, but we do a biweekly thing, and I was saying, okay, I want to be able to spell out for people our whole process, and I want your side. What happens on your end? What does this look like for you? And I heard from a couple of them after they got brought on, and they said, and I felt competent to advocate for myself because I knew you were there. I didn't have to come in and do anything. I have it as part of my map to go in and make sure they're getting what they need, but they didn't need that. They just needed to know there was somebody there that loved them, which they would never have worded it that way. So don't tell them I said that. But so you don't have to have a whole org that's squishy feely. Be the one. That's really important. How much do you want me to go into? Because
I want them to know what, like I told your story badly. You should tell it well.
So I forget to tell people that I have a son on the spectrum, which is how I got into all of this. He is now 20. Tomorrow he will be, no, what's today?
Today's the 24th.
Today's Saturday. All right, Monday
It's
he will
the
be
25th out there, but it's the 24th.
He will be
here.
26 on the 26th, which is how I just had an ear that this was happening. I heard about something at work that got me sucked into this. So I work for MITRE, the first.org. We're a federal contractor. We run research and development centers for the government. We run 6 of them for different government agencies. We do things like design AWACS, and then Lockheed Martin makes them. And for them, I run an internship program, and partly in partnership with RIT, who you heard from earlier. I recruit students on the spectrum or with ADHD to come and do normal internship positions. We're not creating special roles, but we train everybody around them. So it's much more about the training the teams around them get, how to be clear in your instructions, how to treat people as individuals, what kind of accommodations they might need, how to deal with conflict and things like that. I check in with the managers as often or more than I do with the students. And that's gone really well. I think we've 17 or 18 students have run through so far. We bring in a small handful at a time. The other program I run is called the Neurodiverse Federal Workforce. And that is a series of pilots that we run at federal agencies, teaching them how to translate the autism at work or neurodiversity at work methodology that companies like Microsoft and SAP and EY are using, how to translate that into Fed, because that's a whole other world. So we have run one so far at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. All 4 of the interns we ran through were offered positions. One did not clear, which had nothing to do with anything except clearance. So 3 of them were working. One of them was featured at CBS this morning recently. And yeah, there's a bunch of other stuff going on as well, but all that comes out of that. So trying to teach the feds how to be more neuro-inclusive is fun. And, and I learn a lot from my students. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So we started at 5:30. Okay, and take let's do a round of one question, and then I think we'll take a break so that people can stretch their legs and get a drink of water, etc. But basically, everybody shared really unique things that they're doing. No one person is doing the same kind of thing. However, Andrew and Teresa are working on creating a pathway to a job that will be ready for them. Sonia and Mary and Ron are all working on making sure that the people who need the stuff get the stuff. One of the papers that Autistic Doctors International released, and Mary, maybe we can start off with you, released over the summer, was about access to healthcare. And Mary, you can correct me, and I hope you don't have to, because I have been saying this statistic a lot. So if I'm wrong, we're going to correct me and put it out there to the universe. But one of the things when I was listening to the online event that you had talking about your paper that kind of dropped my jaw was that while you were looking at autistic people's access to the healthcare system and what might get in their way, you discovered that there is a diminished life expectancy for autistic people. I believe you said 60 years old. Was that accurate?
Unfortunately, not even 60. This isn't our work. This is work from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. Tatja Herbakoski was the first author on the paper. And for anybody with an interest in this area, it's really well worth a read. There's been several other studies from various other countries which all show the same sort of pattern. But the Herbakoski paper showed that the average life expectancy for an autistic person in their sample, and it was a big population sample, was 54. The general population life expectancy at the time was 70. The average life expectancy was 70. For autistic people without intellectual disabilities, 54. So a 16-year mortality gap. And for those people with co-occurring intellectual disabilities, it was just under 40. So that's just an absolutely phenomenal gap in life expectancy. And the question is why? And our work in ADI, we have focused on the barriers to healthcare and the consequences of those barriers to healthcare. So lots of teams have worked on barriers to healthcare. The healthcare disparities and the actual barriers are very well described. What our work added to that was we asked autistic people about their barriers, the barriers that they faced accessing healthcare. We found that 80% of the autistic sample had difficulty accessing a general practitioner or family physician when they needed to. And we found that access barriers were linked with self-reported adverse outcomes. So people reported things like untreated mental and physical health conditions. That was about 2/3 of the autistic group. Difficulties accessing specialists, difficulties following through with specialist referrals. Most worryingly, 1 in 3 said that they were unable to access healthcare for a potentially serious or life-threatening condition. And it's just absolutely shocking to us. So we have further analysed our qualitative data, and that's currently in preparation at this point, and hopefully we'll have more details on how all the factors that impact healthcare access all intermingle and feed into one another, leading to adverse healthcare outcomes.
Thank you for sharing that. In the room, there was sort of a collective gasp. And, you know, I got the numbers wrong, and I think my brain could not admit to itself what the real numbers were. I inflated them. My husband's probably in the back going, yeah, I didn't need to know that. It's worrisome, right? If you have neurodivergent loved ones.
Yeah.
My husband has seen how hard it is for me to get not even adequate care, period. I'll quickly share, you know, I have the stick because in March I got hit by a car. And my husband came and met me at the scene of the accident and brought me to the emergency room. And I told him, you're going to need to advocate for me because the accident has caused a stutter and a stammer. I'm barely getting my words out. And if I become overwhelmed, I can lose my words. And so Kevin's a wonderful, loving advocate and was instantly introducing me as autistic, and with the possibility of becoming nonverbal. We only met one person in that entire emergency room stay that had any clue what we met. And the results of that were dangerous to me. When I was introduced to the CT scan people, I was introduced by the nurse. This is Dawn Marie. She's autistic. That means she's potentially aggressive and violent. And when the CT people heard that, they became afraid of me. And I immediately said no to the nurse. And she said yes. And a couple of back and forths, my brain starts kicking into gear because my ADHD is massively scanning the room, and I can tell I've been stepped back from by the CT techs. And I realize you need to control your tone, your words, your bodily responses, no flinching, no raised voice, no nothing. Or you're on the fast track to sedation and restraint. They withdrew all of their standard practices. Here in the United States, if you're going to go into a machine, they tell you about it. This is the machine. It makes noise. We'll tell you when it's going to go on and off. They tell you when they're going to touch you. All of those things were withdrawn from my care. When I asked, please don't come up behind me and touch me, because it did make me jump. That's hard for me. Please let me know that you're there. They didn't let me know in the future. They just stopped adjusting my body. So I don't even know if I got a good scan. I've learned recently that it should have been a scan with contrast. I did not get a scan with contrast. And that wasn't the worst of what happened in that space. When Mary's talking about access to care, my story is unfortunately not an aberration. If you go out there in the world of one medical student that I spoke to, her class called it autism Twitter, right? If you go out onto social media and you start becoming part of the communities of autistic and ADHD folks, Tourette's, etc., you're going to find my story over and over and over again, and you're going to find worse. Access to care means a lot of different things, and part of it is the medical community is not trained to even know what it means to have an autistic person in their care. They didn't check me for the traumatic brain injury that I had. Significant concussion was eventually the diagnosis, but not from that emergency room, because they would not believe my husband or me that my stuttering and stammering wasn't my autism, it was the accident. 4 days before I had a legitimate traumatic brain injury diagnosis. And I'd had to re-injure my head to get it. And that doctor asked me, how do you know you hit your head? I had a goose egg. And by then I had no more masking in me. Right? So yeah, if you do have interest in this kind of stuff, look up Autistic Doctors International. There are at least 3 accounts, right, on Twitter. Mary, I know the subs account is there, the main account and your account, all some version of doc, autistic doc. Look them up online and you'll have links to the papers and the research and stuff like that. It's really worth it. Andrew, the things that you do on behalf of the autistic community for work, and I know you're even engaged in online access to online diagnosis, right? There's an organization that I think only operates in Australia and Europe right now. Is that true? Am I remembering that correctly?
It's actually more in Europe at this stage,
More Europe.
but we sort of link to them through the Institute of Neurodiversity out of the UK. But they're trying to put in place a network of practitioners globally that will dramatically reduce the cost and access to diagnosis for, I think, starting with autism and with ADH. So, because they, as I've heard, it can take a long time to access a diagnosis, and it can cost a lot of money. So they're trying to bring forward a standard offering that can allow people access that more consistently, more quickly, and more cost effectively.
So you obviously have a passion for helping this community. Do you find a lot of receptiveness out there in the world when when you try to bring what you're doing to others? Are you finding good interest, good receptivity? Or are you finding significant impediment?
No, there's a lot of interest, and the thing that really struck me when I first started getting involved in this many years ago was the number of people I've met who had a direct connection or lived experience. So through their daughter or their son or their granddaughter or the neighbor or whatever. And when you then look at the stats of the incidents, just autism or the broader neurodivergence, everyone knows someone. So I was really struck by that. And when I started talking to companies about the idea of doing employment programs, talk to them about what we're trying to do, and this is senior people, and they look at me and say, "Thank you, my daughter's autistic, and I don't know what's going to happen, and this is important. We need to do that." So we're finding that when we talk to organisations, we're trying to come into the organisation with a capability lens. So we're not necessarily going to them to say, hey, how about extending your D&I into neurodiversity? We're going to them to talk about capability and how they can look at capability gaps they might have, and how some neurodivergent people would have skills and traits that would fit those really well. So when we start having those conversations, we're coming across a lot of people who have a passion to try and do something because they have that lived experience. And whilst we ultimately do need to involve HR, HR have a lot of things on their plate. They've got a lot of other initiatives, and so you don't want to get lost in the morass of all the initiatives. So we are trying to focus on capability, and we are trying to link into people who have that something at stake in terms of wanting to make change, because it is going to take courage and passion, and it's not just something people will take on just because. We find that the greatest progress is made when we can find people who have a passion and have that at stakeness and are willing to put in a lot of discretionary effort. And so that's why hooking into companies that have employee resource groups or business resource groups or affinity groups, whatever you call them, where you find those companies that have gone the next step and actually created a separate neurodiversity ERG, then that's really a great place to start. And so I encourage companies that have ERGs, and companies are not going to progress unless they have these sorts of groups happening. If they can then create an ERG and actually then create an ERG that's focused on neurodiversity, then that's a great place to start in trying to get change.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Sonia, similar question. I hope everybody does go listen to your talk in the virtual program and watch your little documentary, because it is amazing the work that you do. But one of the things I was thinking when I was watching in your documentary, you show the space that you have created in this one place in Australia, and it is beautiful and brilliant, and I can't even imagine the price tag. And so I can imagine a company saying, I would like to be more sensorially inclusive and accommodating, but I'm not knocking all of my walls down and putting a koi pond in. Like I can provide a pillow, right? Like, so what are you finding when you bring these ideas kind of out there in the world? Are you getting a lot of pushback, or are you finding ways to lay the breadcrumb path to maybe some larger projects?
That's a really good question. One of the interesting things about workplaces where we've focused our work on for the moment, but it has a much broader, I guess, a broader appeal in other places, such as education settings. But in workplaces, they tend to have a 5 to 10 year lifespan. And certainly in Australia, there's an incentive with re-signing a lease for a space and a contribution by the landlord to do the workplace. So we find if we manage to get ourselves at the beginning of a project, we can usually inspire the right sort of path, the right ideas, and to Andrew's point, there's quite a lot of interest because people are largely determined to do what's better for the world, or what the right thing is. So we have many organisations, particularly government ones, that very much supportive of doing a better, more inclusive design. In the case of the project we showed you on that documentary, I like how you call it a documentary, the project hadn't seen a refurbishment, I think, since the 1980s. So that's an exception to the rule. And so there was a lot that could be done. In terms of the cost, the CEO had a maintenance budget that exceeded what we did. So every year the various government organisations get a bunch of money, or various organisations get a bunch of money to maintain their properties, whether it's, you know, fixing a leaky roof or improving the air conditioning. So that sum of money was a lot more than the actual project cost. So we were just very clever with what we did in the project. He had this bucket of money that needed to be spent, and we spent it on better improving the workplace. And yes, we fixed the leaky roof, and yes, we provided indoor courtyards that were open to the elements for people that needed to have fresh air, and yes, we provided natural ventilation. But we managed to do that just through how clever we were with the design, and I guess how clever this particular CEO was with his buckets of money and where he apportioned them. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Yeah, I want buckets of money. That was my takeaway. I'm grateful that you were able to have a project that then allowed you to showcase what you and your team are capable of doing. I think often many of us find ourselves in the expression here in the United States is nickel and diming, where we put pennies where pounds need to be. And so I'm grateful that you're finding projects where you can actually put your full creative and intellectual capacities to work. I do think that probably we should take a little bit of a break and let people go potty and whatever. Sonia, Mary, and Andrew, if you feel able and willing to rejoin us in about 10 minutes, please, please, please do. If it is time for you to go do something else, we will understand. We will miss you terribly, but we will understand. But otherwise, everybody, please come back in about 10 minutes.
Hi, I am Dawn Marie Solis with INAS 2022 Neurodiversity Conference, and I am here with Doctors Mary Doherty and Sebastian Shaw. They are part of an organization that I was so thrilled to discover. It is Autistic Doctors International, and it is representative of actually autistic people in the medical field. They have more than 500 participants around the world. They do amazing support work and research work. They have a little spin-off for autistic medical students. I'm just thrilled to have the opportunity to talk to these two individuals who are doing so much good, real connected research and support for the autistic community as it relates to the medical field. So Mary and Sebastian, thank you so, so much. Please feel free to let everybody know a little bit about you, how the organization started, what you're doing, your research, anything you want to share.
Okay, great. Thank you. Great to be here. Great to be a part of this. ADI started back in 2018. Sorry, no, let me start that again. ADI started back in 2019, in April, on the 1st of April. It's quite funny, although that wasn't by design. And we started because I had realized that I was autistic back in 2013, and I'm a doctor. I'm an anaesthetist. That's my background. And I just needed to connect with my professional peers. I knew that I wasn't, well, I won't say, initially I thought I was the only one, because I searched and I couldn't find anybody else who was openly autistic, or who's, you know, writing about being autistic and being a doctor. And then I realized that couldn't possibly be true. And then I started to meet a couple of others online and got together. Excuse me. So we started with 7, and we're now approaching 600.
That's amazing. That's and to me, so important. I spoke recently to a group of third-year medical students here in the United States, and with the exception of one individual who started off right at the bat by announcing she was ADHD, I asked, would you feel safe if you discovered your identity as a neurodivergent person? Would you feel safe speaking about that, letting your employer know, being out at work? Not one of them. Not one of them. And the one person who did identify in that classroom setting gave some examples of how she had been bullied and rejected really severely in her work and in her education. So what you're doing is just, in my opinion, literally vital and potentially life-saving. And we'll get into a little bit more of that in a bit. But Sebastian, how did you end up coming into this group?
So my journey's a long one, I suppose. So I didn't find out didn't formally find out I was autistic, shall we say, until 2020. I'd self-recognized and my ex-partner had recognized a good number of years before that, but it takes a very long time in the United Kingdom to receive a diagnosis. When I received my diagnosis, well, to step back a bit, so I didn't approach ADI until I'd received a formal diagnosis. And partly I think that's because, like any of us who choose to go through those hoops, I was convinced that someone would tell me I was wrong and there was some other thing going on that wasn't autism. So I didn't want to, I suppose, embed myself too deeply into allowing myself to be my true autistic self until I'd received the formal diagnosis. I'd already gone through, so I grew up gay. I grew up partially in and out of with care orders. Didn't grow up with my parents, so I had lots of reasons already to feel a bit marginalised, a bit different, a bit othered by society. So autism was another thing, I suppose, and I came to that later in life because it was overshadowed by everything else going on. And I initially actually received a dyslexia diagnosis when I was 19. And that's how I got kind of into academia and education, all around supporting dyslexic people. So when I got my autism diagnosis in 2020, I approached ADI. I found an article that Mary had written, actually, and approached Mary, who accepted me into the group, lingered in the background, like I think most of us do, for a while. And then there was a call in the group asking for anyone with any research backgrounds to help with a grant application, essentially. And I looked at it and thought, got a bit of a background, but I'm sure there's far bigger players in this group than me. So I ignored it for a while, and then eventually replied saying, I'm happy to help, but I do have grant experience. And I guess it was a bit of a snowball effect from there. I somehow rapidly took on the research lead role. I think that was since June 2021, and have sort of overseen our academic stuff since then, and helping, we're very, very guided by Mary, but helping to shape the way we take our research and our academic impact moving forwards.
Your sort of speedy insertion into the bigger picture, to me, feels very autistic. It's like, oh, I've discovered a new thing. I am now doing all of it, right? It just feels like it represents your identity just really, really nicely. One of the things that I have found personally profoundly valuable, your group does do research. And when I started following the things that you're publishing and the things that you're working on, the large comforting hug I felt from all of you was you make every effort to include the community in, you don't just research with them, the community designs the research, thinks it up, manages, creates, evaluates. Over and over and over again, I hear from all over the world, people who are neurodivergent. Why did nobody ask us? We are pathologized, we are demonized, we are all of these things because people who don't live our experience are deciding things about us. And you have chosen to do it differently. Mary, are you able to share a little bit of the background of why your group chose to be so intent in that way?
I think from the very earliest sort of days when I was getting in, when I was being brought into sort of autism advocacy, I became aware of just the healthcare barriers and just the inequalities in healthcare that we face as a community. And as I started to look at it myself, I mean, I don't have anything like the academic background that Seb has. So I mean, Seb has completely revolutionized ADI and the direction that we're going in since he's joined us, because I was very much floundering. Right up there, I'm absolutely floundering in terms of trying to get some research happening, trying to get some, particularly as you say, participatory research going. And it was really difficult, but Seb has really transformed that aspect of ADI, which has just been fantastic. But it's a very key point of why the organization exists. We started off as a peer support and advocacy group, and it was very much around peer support for autistic doctors, for our colleagues, for and then subsequently the medical students group. But from the very beginning, it was always about the community, the wider community, because I did have, even though it wasn't really crystallized until quite recently, I did have a very sort of nebulous vision of how, as autistic doctors, we can sort of step in that gap between the autistic community and the healthcare professional community, and in some ways just bring the two sides together and make things easier for the whole community. So we're very much about healthcare for autistic people as well as support for autistic healthcare professionals.
Seb, when you discovered this group, you mentioned how you sort of wondered how you would fit, but the discovery that there was an organization out there that was designed for you, how did that feel?
Initially daunting, actually. Because I was so engrossed in sort of dyslexia research and things, and dyspraxia research as well. I'd gotten very used to neurodivergence, neurodiversity movement, and all of that side of things. But back at that point in time, I'd never really been involved with any larger movement, because whilst there are some now, there was nothing at that point specific to any of the areas of neurodivergence I've been working in or had, to my knowledge, been experiencing. So discovering ADI was quite daunting, I think, at first, particularly when I saw just how many members there were. And because I was a relatively junior doctor at the time, it was one of those, I'll be on a fly on the wall and just see what people chat about. Maybe they'll use it like an agony aunt. I'll learn some stuff from other people talking. Let's see how it goes. And I suppose until I saw the research post, probably 6 months or so after I joined, that was all I did. I kind of sat in the background. So I joined the Facebook group rather than any of the WhatsApp groups initially. And I just kind of watched what other people were posting and the discussions that were going on. And it was then, research was my comfort area and a skill that I could bring. So when that opportunity came up, that's when I finally stepped forwards.
I hear from so many people, my clients, the people I'm involved with in social media, that their experience with the medical field is less than stellar. They find they're not understood or listened to. I did another interview conversation with a gentleman yesterday, And he was talking about how, you know, when you go to the doctor, you need to tell them everything. They can't help you if you don't tell them everything. And he does not identify as a neurodivergent person. And that was really telling to me, because his experience in going to a doctor and telling them everything has been positive. My experience, and thousands upon thousands of others, has not. When you're neurodivergent and you come and you start telling everything, and everything for a neurodivergent person can be different than for others. We do not get the same engagement or recognition or help. You know, I have stories from my own life of being in emergency care. I was hit by a car in March, and in emergency care, and my husband was trying to advocate for me, because even though
I'm on again. I know. I think we're back. Do we have who in our virtual people came back? Do we have any of them? Yay, Andrew is still here. The buttons are still there. They may have toddled off. So let's just get going. They can rejoin if they choose to. So thank you everybody for coming back. I want to pick up Ron. I think I want to turn to you. You work in this world where you have to talk to middle and upper management and owners of companies and say, hey, I know you're doing a great job, but you can do better. Let's talk about it. What's the response? Do leaders like have that full body relax of, oh yeah, I need help, thank God you showed up, or I'm fine, go away, Ron? What's the response?
So the reality of the current environment is it's not that rosy, I'll say. So there's an interesting phenomenon in terms of the business that we have in trying to impress on people the improvement of especially leadership skills. We talk to so many people that recognize the value for what we do, and the value, that the need for the perspectives that we have in the organizations that we talk to. And so then the next level is actually, if you will, getting in the door. I mean, not to make it into a business thing, but you know, you eventually have to get in there and actually work with people. You can't just convince them that it's a good idea. To date, the majority of engagement with us has really, in terms of actual face-to-face interaction and working with leaders, has been primarily at the, I'll say, the supervisor, first line, middle management level. And so what we do in those engagements is we fundamentally talk about empathy and servant leadership, and you know, how to engage and build relationships, and therefore build environments of trust. And we really try to paint a picture to these leaders of the type of leaders that they want to be, that we want them to be, to kind of realize this this future that we can envision. The most disheartening part, honestly, of all of that is the surveys after the training, which is, you know, as you would hope, life-changing, so encouraging. But above and beyond that, the number one comment that we get from this training is, when's my boss going to get this? Because this is not what I experience. This is not what I get. And what we found, and this is kind of the formula that me and a couple of my colleagues are trying to figure out how to break this formula, is how do we get that full focus? Because yeah, it's not productive. I'm not an expert in these types of things, but I know that culture is a strange kind of animal. I know that fundamentally culture changes from the bottom up. There's no culture that's ever been mandated from the top down, but it has to be supported from the top, and it has to be, in a sense, defined from the top. And if so, if what we're getting is the top saying, hey, we got this problem down here, why don't you go fix it with your magic servant leader, empathy stuff, and we're still going to sit up here and you'll make it easier for us to do our job. I hate to sound cynical about that, but that's the reality, as we call it, the reality of the battle. That's what we're trying to combat. So if there is anybody in the room or online that is in those types of positions, I really encourage you to take a real look at your organizations and the health of the organizations, because it's not a sustainable model. Even long-standing organizations that are pretty well established are only going to survive in an environment where there is not an appreciation, and I'll go back to the word, a love in those organizations. Eventually, everybody's going to leave because they just don't want to be there. So it's one of those things that it's strangely encouraging and disappointing at the same time, right? So if you'll just allow me to take that to the neurodivergency and neurodiversity level, the way that gets portrayed, I think, is a great opportunity. Because as a lot of people have pointed out, there's a huge population there that I think is, I don't want to say untapped, but certainly misunderstood, and is a great opportunity for people to, A, find a workforce that may be rightly aligned to what they need to do, but B, would be a great opportunity to kind of reset and start over with a campaign or a focus that says, this is a community that we want to value, and we want to build some organizational values around that value and try to take that forward. So it's a little highfalutin, I guess. It's a little bit of a high reach, but if you want to know the vision, I think that's the vision. Bottom line is, once you start talking to companies, and I'm sure several of the colleagues will say this, is everybody, first they want to know how, what's the resources, what's the things that are available that you can do, what's the business case for it. I'll spend some money on it, but what's the return? And so I think that's, especially from this community, that's a part of what the business community could use some help with, is kind of creating that business case.
Tris, I think in the work that you're doing, some of the things that Ron's saying, probably resonating. When you and I first talked, I was shocked, actually, that you had fellow upper management colleagues that were so interested in supporting what you wanted to do. But I think you told me at least one of them also had a neurodivergent child, and I think that makes a big difference. One of the things that I think is part of the culture shift, at least here in the United States, when my kids were little and I was doing contract work, I worked for a publishing company in Boston when my middle child was still breastfeeding. And so when I was called to Boston, the little one came with me. Right. And there I was on like the 12th floor of some really tall Boston building with my baby carriage, child in the carriage, and women flying out of their offices. Who are you and how did you get a baby in the building? And I'm me. I ask for stuff, and I don't know that I shouldn't ask until I'm in trouble. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm a remote employee. And they're like, you're a remote. Well, you're a what? You can do that, right? I had taught the organization how to allow me to be a remote employee. So this is back then. We've got some culture things changing. COVID shoved us into a new culture change. But I don't know that like a lot of us in this room are necessarily going to feel like I'm going to go to my boss and I'm going to say, I really think we should seek and hire autistic and ADHD people on purpose. And the boss is going to be like, you know what? I agree. Right? I don't know. That's like a world I didn't know existed. So when you came into my life and you said, yeah, this thing happened. However, it's not like it was that easy. you may have had some initial support, but you've had your own roadblocks and impediments in the way. How have you found your inner strength and resilience to continue to move forward in this work you know is so valuable?
Keeping track of the wins, I think, is it. I have had the privilege of some really great bosses. And how do you find those people? How do you find the guy who's a VP who has a stepson on the spectrum? You talk a lot. Anybody who will stand still long enough for you to talk to them, and somewhere along the line, you're going to bump into somebody. This guy, actually, I knew his wife, and he was fresh meat. He had just come back to MITRE, and the day after orientation, I was in his office.
Hello.
He was a fresh VP with buckets of money. But actually that just went to me learning. I was still in the learning phase at that time, I was granted the gift of time to go learn, which was huge. And yeah, nobody doesn't like this idea. As one of my friends says, nobody doesn't like the idea. And this whole concept of neurodiversity and hiring for neurodivergence and being neuro-inclusive and whatever else you can tack neuro onto will get you in just about any door. But as with all good things, not out of my budget. Almost every time. Unless it's somebody high enough up, which is how we got our first pilot, was a deputy director at National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, went to Israel and saw one of the programs that a lot of us hold up as a good model. Probably great friends with Andrew. He's taken a lot of their stuff, which I stole from him. She went, she saw it, she said, this is great. She called back home and said, I want one of those, give me one. And her team went, a what? And so that sent them roundabout a bunch of ways to us. So yes, at the ground level, you got to have the guts, but there's got to be somebody at the top pointing down. The other agency that was supposed to be our second agency, they've had paperwork since last May. And I've been talking to them since 2019. So how do I keep at it? It's the students saying, because you guys are there, I had the guts to go self-advocate. And it's the congressional staff that calls up and says, if we want to say something about this, how do we say that? And it's those wins, and having somebody that helps me remember those wins is huge. So if you know somebody doing this work, take it upon yourself to remind them of the wins, because it gets disheartening.
I appreciate that very much. I think counting the wins can be a hard thing. One of the ways that a neurodivergent brain can be beautiful and burdensome is those folks who are like me, where our brains are tremendous synthesizers. We reach out into every memory, every bit of knowledge, everything we've ever thought or heard or seen, and we bring it all in, and we can create new, beautiful, amazing things from it. Which is how I went and looked for a conference, didn't find one I liked, so I made one, right? Like, it's a beautiful, wonderful thing. But that same brain runs out and gathers all the information from every memory and every experience that was negative and brings it all into the same space. And so finding the resilience, finding the capacity, finding the words, finding the courage, those are things that can be really hard. And so, yeah, we're certainly going to rah the leader. We're going to rah the advocate. We're going to, if you were here earlier and you heard LaToya Price, who is just like fire. That woman is amazing. And I want her as my buddy for the rest of my life, because she will eat my adversaries for lunch.
Those are important people.
Love her, right?
Important people.
I am in awe. Not all of us have that in us, but maybe we can find our LaToyas, I'm very locational. She was sitting over there earlier today. She is no longer there. And I point at stuff that's not there. I'd like to open up to the floor, and if there's anybody online, we have these brilliant people here. And there's stuff that we could tell them. They're doing work, right? They're doing things. If you have a question or if there's something that you'd like them to know while they go do their thing, we have a microphone. We will run around. Did our microphone runner go home? Oh, we're going to get a new one. Okay. Oh, no, it's the same one. We have a microphone runner. If you have a thing that you would like to say, share, or ask of any of the folks here, the floor is open to you.
Hi. Hello.
There you go.
Hi. My name is Emma, and there's actually a Korean drama that has been very popular, and it's called Extraordinary Attorney Woo, and it's depicting an high-functioning autistic female attorney at a law firm in Korea. I do think it's problematic how entertainment depicts like neurodiverse individuals, but it does show how like this law firm hired her specifically because she was so good at memorizing and using the law. So it's showing how like K dramas are very popular all over the world, and it's highlighting the issue of autism and neurodiversity. And I think it's important to see more representation, you know, and like I think there are a lot of stereotypes, and we have to break those stereotypes and stop like discrimination against individuals who are not like quote unquote normal, you know.
I think you're right. And I think it's an interesting balance because normal doesn't sell, right? And then there are a couple of types of reality that sell, like Love on the Spectrum. It's been very popular, but mostly it needs to be somebody extraordinary, something extra. So it can be problematic when you expect superhero from everybody who's on the spectrum. But on the other hand, starts that conversation that wasn't there, you know. So I think that's our jobs, right? That's our job to take that, somebody talking about this and dig a little deeper with them so that they'll learn. It's a tricky road to walk.
Mary, I'm sorry, I want to loop Mary in here. Mary, when you, Seb, and I were talking for the recorded thing, one of the things we talked about, and we actually just played it here in the auditorium, was that a lot of autistic doctors don't feel safe coming out at work. And so, like, even though you have a 600 plus strong organization of autistic doctors, they are not all out in their professional spaces. I mentioned in the recording that when I talk to medical students and I ask the question, would you come out as autistic or ADHD? The vast majority of them, literally like 99%, no, we would not do that. That would not feel safe to us. I'm not going to really ask a direct question, but can you talk about what that is for you and your colleagues?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've just completed a formal membership survey, and we're just in the process of analyzing the data, and that shows us that very much a minority of our members are out at work, are openly autistic, and there's a couple of reasons for that. And the biggest issue is that from a professional point of view, it's actually not safe for a lot of people. Because the reactions to a disclosure can be very varied, and they very much depend on the knowledge and attitudes of the people that you're disclosing to, and that's often very hard to ascertain in advance. So it's a real risk. It genuinely is risky for a lot of people. Now, some people have to come out. There's no alternative. For some people, coming out and getting reasonable accommodations is career saving for a lot of people. Sometimes it really is the only way to explain a situation that people might have got themselves into. But the vast majority of our members are working away absolutely fine, you know, not with any degree of difficulty whatsoever, which really challenges those stereotypes that, that we are a difficulty within medicine. We're absolutely not. We're an absolute asset to the profession. But when autistic doctors do run into trouble, it does tend to be in very sort of particular ways. So sometimes gaining an understanding of that can be really, really useful. I'm currently looking at a study of some of our members in psychiatry, and they would be probably among the least likely to come out. They would probably be, psychiatrists would be the most overrepresented subspecialty in ADI, and they're the second largest group after GPs and family physicians. But when you look at the relative numbers, they're the most overrepresented for sure, but the least likely to disclose. And that's very much, I think, because of the culture within psychiatry, and just the diagnostic criteria as well, because they're just so negative and so deficit focused that people just don't see themselves within that. And then, of course, the big issue really is the empathy deficit myth, which is absolutely not true. But the idea is so pervasive that, you know, people are genuinely afraid of coming out and, you know, being openly autistic because of the assumptions that will be made about them. So when I'm asked by our members, should I disclose, it's always very much, well, there's two sides to that and it's risky. But for those of us who can, I'm openly autistic at work and it's great. For those of us who can, it just takes away that pressure to mask all the time, which is hugely beneficial. So for people lucky enough to be able to disclose, absolutely, it makes life so much easier. But it does come with a caveat that it may be risky. I mean, we have had members who have been removed from training programs. We have had student members basically ejected from medical school having disclosed. So we have to be very, very careful.
Yeah, I have a lot of rough days because I'm so involved in the community, and so I read a lot, or I hear from a lot of people about their experiences of rejection. And I was involved in a conversation online where an autistic doctor asked for a medical student asked for accommodation, and the response from the professor was so spectacularly aggressive. Did not just suggest leaving the program, but suggested that they weren't worth their breath that they breathed. And they were turning to this community for support. And how do I stay in a school where they don't even think I deserve to live, let alone be a student? And you know, my heart breaks over and over and over again, which is part of the reason why I do sort of fawn and fangirl, Mary, when, you know, when I have an opportunity to share your work, because people need to know you're there. Like you were saying, right? If we know you're there, it gives a little bit of hope to those of us who are trying to do things. Sonia, your world is pretty significantly different, but I have to believe that an architecture student, so I don't know what architecture education is like in Australia, but I can tell you what it's like here in the United States. It's very similar to a medical education. You are not allowed to sleep or eat or have another thought than architecture for at least 4 years, if not 8, before anyone will let you file the paperwork of the office, let alone create a thing. My assumption, and assumptions are always scary, but my assumption is that's not a safe place to say, hey, I am a different thinker and processor, and I would like an accommodation, please.
No.
What's your experience like in that space?
I think it's changed a lot as our awareness grows. But it's interesting that you say that, because I was thinking back to the mid-90s when I was working in an architectural office for the first couple of years after I graduated, and what my role was there, which was predominantly to copy die line prints and make tea. And on the side, learn and drive many different cars as I went to site of all the different architects that worked in the space. So I was sort of running around doing the hard work that you do, I guess, as you're learning, and I did that gratefully. But having said that, I think it's very different now, and the reason being, in Australia, I can speak to Australia's experience. And the reason being is that a lot of our design practices tend to be involved with universities. We do a lot of student mentorship at universities, and I sit on an advisory panel at one of the universities here as well for the School of Design, and we get a great insight into what the schools are doing. We also get to advise them on what the industry's doing, so that when the students graduate, they can be ready for the industry. So our interaction has changed a lot since, maybe 20, 30 years ago. And therefore, there's a big proactive approach for making sure diverse students are included in practice. I certainly have experienced that in my current practice, and I know of other practices that do that. So it's a largely positive kind of direction that we're all heading in, which is something that I guess I am happy about and can be proud about, especially for students who might not fit the norm, which is great. There's kind of almost a desire for practices to employ students who don't fit the norm. So that's a positive story.
So representation, absolutely is necessary, but not, some of us have the space where we can be. I mean, I found out I was autistic. I started telling everybody I'm autistic, and I was so happy about it. It doesn't mean I got, happy responses all the time. But I'm still really happy about it. And I still tell anybody who stands still for 3 seconds, I'm autistic, as I hold my chair, because nobody knew I was autistic. Come on. So I think, Ron, you were gonna respond a little bit more directly to the audience questions. That's something you still want to do?
Yeah, I think and I'll lead this in by saying I often overly simplify things, but the image, and you might even say the message, is important. And from my perspective, I said I worked at Lockheed Martin for 33 years. 13 of those I was in I ran the leadership development program for Lockheed, and prior to that, I was in leadership roles. I went to my first leadership conference 25 years ago. It was actually a church conference, and have been kind of a student of leadership ever since. I have a reading library of 100 and some leadership books that I've actually reviewed about 80 some of them that I recommend. And, I teach leadership classes at Binghamton University and at Penn State. I'm not unfamiliar with this, and I'm not saying that to try to build any credential. I'm just saying it to say the first time I heard the word neurodiversity is at a Chamber of Commerce meeting from Dawn Marie. And it's not like I had my head in the sand that this wasn't it. And I actually sat here during the break and I tried to think through, of all of those books that I read, those hundreds of books and those 80 that I've reviewed, none of those mention neurodiversity either. They all mentioned the concepts, I was talking to somebody earlier, one of my favorite authors is Simon Sinek. I mean, all of that in terms of those engagements and those connections and how to, demonstrate empathy, but nothing was specific. And I think that's part of the image problem. I say problem because I think it is an image problem. That's the other part of this, is I am just blown away by the resources and the research and the infrastructure that exists to support this. But I really wonder, where is that leading into leadership, right? Because leadership, that's the path to get it infused. And I love to hear stories about MITRE and how that's happening, right? But how does that story get out to, are you telling that story to Lockheed? Well, I'm happy to hear it, but I never heard it come back around when I was there, right? So that, I think, is the challenge for this community, is to think about how do we band together to get all these resources and get a voice and get a message out there that, especially those of us that are out there that are not experts, not clinical experts, don't do the research, can grab hold of and can kind of put in front of these people that we're talking to.
Oh, that's a big hope. I didn't turn myself back on. Am I on? On? Not on. Now I'm on. Yay. Okay. Just having. INAS is designed the way it is, in part to hopefully toss the pebble so that the ripples go out. You all, the five of you are here on this stage in these remarkably different disciplines, because we have to talk to people unlike ourselves in order to know the things.
Andrew, how long have you been running Untapped?
So it's 4.5 years we've been going now.
So when you worry that nobody's heard of this before, it's not because they weren't listening. There was nothing to hear before, and this is all really new. So good news, you are all on the cutting edge.
Yeah, and I'm not to imply that it's been a bad effort to this point. I think that this is, in any of these transitions, if you will, transformations, it's an important part to get the messaging, get the momentum.
Mhm. Even the oldest programs, 12 years, Andrew, I would say, the oldest.
Yeah, probably around that.
12, right?
Maybe a little bit older.
15.
Yeah, about that.
Yeah, and the language changes every day, so you're going to be wrong however you say it. Just say it. It's okay.
Yeah, you got to keep looking at the language and how we talk about things. So that's part of the narrative. But just to some of the other comments, it is about how do we get the message out, and we really got to try this multifaceted channel approach. And so that's one point of the Neurodiversity Hub, was to create something that we could point people to, and we're now getting over 8,000 hits a month globally and 40% in the US. And we've got a Facebook page linked to that, which we're putting out 10 articles a month that we curate from around the world. And we've got about 5,000 followers on that. And then the conferences, just being involved, the opportunity to be involved in this conference now, the other conferences we do, the great work that the University College Dublin has done in taking real leadership, thought leadership in this. And then also, the Stanford conference has been going for a number of years. We're a big supporter of that. So, it's really trying to use those mechanisms to get the message out, and just having this ongoing dialogue with members of the Neurodiversity Hub community practice, with whatever they're trying to do to forward that. So it's just trying all these different angles to try and get in there and trying to get messages out, and it's just the tenacity of it and continuing to go. And I just love the thing that Ron said before about how the world has changed, and we probably haven't realized yet. So post-pandemic, we've got this different group of people that we've got to we're now working with. And so for those businesses out there, those managers out there who are waiting for it to go back to how it used to be, light bulb moment, it's not going to happen. So we're in the new paradigm, and if your business is going to recover, And there are a lot of businesses that are still struggling. I still keep seeing businesses that are closing. They've gotten all the way through the pandemic and now they've given up. Probably because they were waiting for it to come back and it hasn't, and they've gone. So really, it's how do we recognize that we've got to be a much more team-based approach, less about individuals, more about having the team having just a range of skills that we're accessing and having the flexibility of how we work together. And there's still a long way to go, I think, in how we can use the tech and other things to connect people and get those flexible working arrangements in place, those project arrangements. So there's still a long way to go, but the sooner that we all realize that it's not going to be how it was, we might actually start accelerating the change.
I think that's a brilliant statement. Acknowledge, accept. We're not going to go back. We need to move forward. And that's why we were doing this deep dive tonight. How do we move forward? We've got just a few more minutes left. The other panels that I moderated today, we ended with each panelist. If there's something you could speak out to the world, like if you had the megaphone in the sky and it spoke to the planet, from your own lived experience, from your professional work, wherever in your being it comes from, what is it that you want the world to know, recognize, realize, accept? If there's a thing you wish you could say to all about this neurodivergent community, what would that be? Andrew, can we start with you?
Wow. I think the big thing is we've got to continue with changing the narrative, because out of changing the narrative, different possibilities can arise. And so I encourage everyone to pull out their magic wand and make one wish of something that's going to happen before the end of this year, and take a few positive steps towards making that a reality. And if everyone can do that in relation to this whole area and about changing the narrative, and we can start speaking differently, then action will come.
Thank you. Sonia, what do you think?
I think picking up on Winnie's comment to me, and the comment that was made, I think, during one of your earlier sessions, that universal design is good for us all, is probably the comment that I'd like to end on, because although we're focusing our research on sensory design and having a better understanding of the neurodiverse cohort of our population, because we have lots of reasons to, the adjustments that we're making, the improvements that we're making in our built environments as a result, will not only be better for our neurodiverse group of people, but for the larger population itself.
Thank you. Ron, what do you think?
So this is a megaphone to the world.
This is a megaphone to the world. You get your 3 seconds. Go.
So it's I'm going to use a quote that I actually heard at a leadership conference, and it was a church leadership conference. And since I'm in a church building, I'll kind of refer to my faith background, not to be exclusive of any other faiths or beliefs, but the comment was, when Jesus said to love your neighbor, it was not a suggestion. That's where we start. If there's one thing I could tell every person, start with loving your neighbor, and then love the next person next, the next person, and it would be a much different world.
Thank you. What do you think, friend of mine?
If I could speak something into being,
Yes.
in my dream world, autism, ADHD, dyslexia are just personality types. And that some of the language we're starting to hear is neurotypes.
Yep.
And, you know, in the not so distant past, we finally woke up to, you know, introverts aren't supposed to be like extroverts. And, you know, you need to treat them a little bit differently so that they can be comfortable in the spaces that you're in. And I feel like as we're changing this conversation, to Andrew's point, and as we're loving people, to Joe's point, that people are what they are. They need you to speak to them a little bit differently, maybe. Respect them as they are, and it's just their neurotype. It's not a disease or a disability. It's only a disability if we, well, in some ways, it can be a disability just because it's a disability. But a lot of the time, it's only a disability because the people around don't understand or make it so. And I think I would speak into being that neurotypes are treated just like personality types, and we all just move along.
I think for me, it's about similar. It's changing the narrative. It's recognizing that the world needs us. The world needs neurodivergent brains. Medicine needs neurodivergent brains. And just moving away from that tragedy narrative towards a neurodiversity affirmative approach. And for me, that's where it's at. That's the most important thing. That will save lives.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I'm profoundly moved and grateful by all of this. Thank you, audience, for being here online. Thank you for being here. We will find ways to move forward together. This conference is a starting line. It is the pebble in the pond. The ripples are yet to be seen. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for bringing your stories, your hearts, your tears, your joys. This has been a blessing to me and to many beyond. So thank you. Have a good night, everybody. Or a good morning, Australia. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
All right, folks, that's